In a quiet village nestled along the winding banks of the Loire River in France, there lived a girl named Elise. She worked in a small bookshop inherited from her grandmother, where the smell of old pages and lavender tea danced through the air. Every morning, she opened the wooden shutters and watched the river whisper past, carrying stories from distant lands. Elise believed in love, not the grand kind sung about in operas, but the quiet kind, gentle, persistent, like the river that flowed beside her every day. Yet, love had always stayed a respectful distance, watching her from the shadows of poetry and the corners of worn-out love letters. One spring, when the cherry blossoms painted the village in soft hues of pink, a stranger arrived. His name was Julian, a travel photographer with eyes the color of twilight and a smile that came slowly, like sunlight after rain. He entered her shop one morning with a camera slung over his shoulder and asked if she had a book about the legends of the river. They spoke. First about the book. Then about legends, then about places. Then, suddenly, about dreams. Julian returned each morning, not always for books. Sometimes just for the tea. Sometimes to hear Elise speak of stories she had never told anyone else, about her fear of forgetting her mother's voice, about her habit of writing letters she never sent, about her longing to be remembered not for doing something grand, but for being kind. He listened. And sometimes, when she didn't speak, he watched her in silence as if she were a mystery worth unraveling slowly. As the weeks melted into summer, their days became a quiet rhythm: coffee at dawn, walks by the river, long conversations about everything and nothing. They never spoke of love. But it was there, in the way he brushed the hair from her eyes, in the way she saved the last cherry tart just for him. One evening, after a sudden summer rain, they sat by the river, barefoot and laughing, drenched in memories and moonlight. Julian turned to her, voice barely above the water's whisper. "I was supposed to leave yesterday," he said. "But every time I try, something inside me tells me this, you, is the story I've been waiting to find." Elise looked at him, heart trembling. "Then stay," she whispered, "and let's write it together." And so he did. Julian never left. He put his camera down more often and picked up her hand instead. He filled his albums with photos of little moments, a smile behind a book, steam rising from 2 cups of tea, shadows dancing under the trees. Years passed. The village changed slowly, like the river. The bookshop grew older. So did they. But love, true, soft, and patient, never aged. Sometimes tourists would come and ask Elise and Julian how they met. They would smile, look at the river, and say, "It was the river who whispered our names to each other." And every time the river passed by, it carried their story along, downstream, to those still waiting to fall in love. Where the lavender grows. In a quiet countryside village of Provence, nestled between golden fields and endless rows of lavender, lived a young woman named Elise. She was known for her soft-spoken nature and the small bookshop she owned at the edge of town, Le Coeur de Livres, the heart of books. Every morning, Elise would open the shutters, place a small vase of fresh lavender on the counter, and begin her day among stories she loved. One rainy afternoon, as thunder rolled over the distant hills, a stranger stepped into the shop. His coat was soaked, and his dark hair stuck to his forehead. He looked like he hadn't smiled in a while. "Bonjour," Elise greeted, her voice calm and warm. "Would you like some tea? You look like you've traveled far." The man nodded, managing a faint smile. "That would be nice. I'm Julian." Julian was a photographer from Paris, weary of the city's chaos, searching for something quieter. Something honest. He had come to Provence to capture the bloom of lavender for a magazine, but something about Elise's little bookshop made him linger. Over the days that followed, Julien visited more frequently. Sometimes he brought pastries. Sometimes old books he thought she might like. And sometimes he brought silence, a comforting, shared silence that felt like peace. Elise found herself smiling more, laughing at his dry humor, and watching how he would carefully photograph the corners of her shop like they were sacred. In return, Julien started to open up about the heartbreak that brought him here, a love lost in the noise of ambition, a life that felt empty despite success. One golden evening, they sat outside the bookshop, the lavender fields glowing purple beneath the sunset. Elise turned to him and whispered, "You look different now." "How so?" "Less lonely." Julien looked at her then, eyes full of something tender. "That's because I found someone who speaks in quiet." Summer passed, and their connection deepened like roots in fertile soil. But the time came when Julien had to return to Paris for work. Elise didn't ask him to stay, and he didn't ask her to follow. They just stood among the lavender as the train's whistle echoed across the hills. "I'll come back," Julien promised, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Not just to visit. To stay." Elise smiled through her tears. "Then I'll wait where the lavender grows." Months passed. Letters arrived, filled with photos, poems, dreams. And then, one spring morning, as Elise opened her shop, she found a new book on her counter. It was titled The Heart of Lavender by Julien Moreau. She opened it and found a handwritten note inside. "This is where I belong. Not in the pages of the past, but here, with you." And as she turned around, there he stood, camera around his neck, lavender in his hand, and love in his eyes.